Even though it's fall, you should be thinking spring, because the tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, and crocus, which flower in springtime, need to be planted this fall. So here are a few tips on how to select the bulbs. For example, this is a daffodil bulb, and in the trade they call this one peak here a nose. So this is what's called a single nose bulb, and this will produce one flower and one flower only. Now, out of the same bin, I selected this bulb, which is called, in the trade again, a double nose bulb. Now on average, this bulb will produce 1.5 flowers. And we know bulbs don't produce a half a flower, but if you have 2 bulbs, for example, you should get 3 flowers on average. Now, out of the same bin, I selected this one. And you can see there's 1 nose, there's 2, and there's 3. So the triple nose bulbs will average 2 flowers per bulb. And they're all out of the same bin. They cost exactly the same amount of money. So when you're shopping, why not look for the triple nose bulbs and see if you can find them. They're a much better investment for you. Now, also, here are some tulips. These have the skin on them. And sometimes you'll find in the nurseries and the garden centers those that do not have the skins on them. It really doesn't make any difference. So the important thing, though, is to look to see that the bulbs are firm. And I have a good example right here, again, going back to the daffodils. All you need to do is just squeeze this a little. Don't squeeze it hard, but just a little, and you can see right away that this one's mushy. It's no good. So by all means, don't buy that bulb. Now, I couldn't find any hyacinths in the garden center when I went shopping yesterday, but the important thing I can very briefly tell you is with hyacinths, use small bulbs in the garden. If you're forcing them, use the large bulbs, and you can save yourself some money that way. And look what else I found when I was in the garden center yesterday. Cochicum. Looks like a crocus, doesn't it? It is. It's the fall, or what's often called the autumn crocus. And this is the most popular, but they come in other colors too. You can plant these right now, because as what happens in springtime, the foliage comes up, it dies down, and then in the fall comes this beautiful crocus flower. A great plant to add in the garden. And then one other last word about bulbs, and that is this. This is the amaryllis. And you can see it flowered this spring, and now it had the foliage. Right now is the time that you put this away. Quit watering it, fertilizing it, don't give it any care whatsoever. Let the foliage die back naturally, clip it back at that point, and then just let the bulb store for, about a month or so. In other words, the whole process takes about 3 months, then you can start it all over again. Give those bulbs the attention they need now. The spring flowering bulbs are really easy to plant, but here are a few hints to make it maybe a little bit easier for you. First of all, how deep do you plant the bulbs? I'm going to, by the way, in the front of this bed, plant dwarf tulips, really low growing ones. But usually is what you determine is the diameter of the bulb, or the width of the bulb. And the distance between my thumb and forefinger, for example, is the diameter of the bulb, and it's basically about 1.5 inches. Multiply that by 3, so this bulb should be planted about 4.5 inches deep, or a little bit deeper. Now the Dutch sometimes also measure it this way, which they call to the peak, or to the nose of the bulb. And in this particular case, it's very, very similar. So the planting depth, once again, is about 4.5 to 5 inches deep. So either way, you can use. Now, the important thing is to properly prepare the soil. That's the key. Because insects like bulbs. So we'll add a little bit of soil dust, actually bulb dust, to the planting area. And I'll also add a little bit of bulb fertilizer. Now you can use any kind of bulb fertilizer that's not too high in nitrogen. And then mix those in well in the planting hole. And you can see the depth is about, in this particular case, 4.5, maybe 5 inches deep. Now the placement of the bulbs is also very important. See, I like to plant them this way. You can plant them individually if you want. In fact, some people just throw them out over the soil and plant them wherever they land. And in a naturalized planting, that's really a good way to do it. But I like to dig one hole and put a lot of bulbs. That way then, as my wife comes on in springtime and the bulbs are in bloom, she can pick 1 or 2 and it doesn't spoil the display in the garden at all. So we put a bulb here, and we'll put one but so they do not touch each other. We don't want them to touch. And the reason for that is that if they touch, if one of them gets a disease or begins a rot, it can be passed to the other. So by leaving a little bit of space between the bulbs, then it's much, much better. And in this case, I'm going to plant a whole dozen, actually it's 10, excuse me, in this planting hole. I bought these by the tens. All the bulbs are pointed end up. That's really important because sometimes we tend to plant them the wrong way and then we into a little bit of trouble. They still will bloom, but it's pointed end is up on almost all bulbs that you plant into the garden. And then all we need to do is simply pull the soil in over the top. And over this top area then, if you wanted to, is what you could plant is winter flowering pansies or kale or cabbage or something of that nature for a little bit of color during the winter season. It's that easy, and right now is a perfect time to plant out those tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, and crocus.